the irony is, while information is so accessible, arguably more accessible than it ever has been before, the information we're actually seeing is often the least interesting or least informative part.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Big Sister General.
These days, a 30-second scroll has me seeing photos of Trump looking like a tomato. Then I'm being encouraged to start doing my makeup like a tomato girl, whatever that means. And then I'm being shown recipes of 15 bean soup. And this video actually has nothing to do with food, surprisingly. I'll switch to maybe a different platform and I'll be shown tragedy and horror. And within 2 seconds, I get whiplash because I'm being shown a 2016 clip of James Charles, which has somehow resurfaced on the internet. And I'm suddenly enraged. If this doesn't explain literally everyone's experience on social media, then I don't know where you are, and please let me know because I need to get on your platform. It's an emotional roller coaster out here. It's crazy. No wonder we're feeling so distressed all of the time and so anxious. In fact, I literally saw a TikTok recently and it was like, when was the last time you actually felt bored? Because personally, I just feel anxious and then reach for my phone. And I feel like that sums up exactly how I feel. If I'm not doing something, I don't just sit in the boredom. I feel anxious and concerned that I'm not doing something because I'm so used to seeing content and having content thrown my way willingly or unwillingly that I can't just sit with my own thoughts. Entertainment sits side by side with political tragedy, and politics is quite literally the same as pop culture right now.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
There is no distinction between how we're consuming it, nor is there any distinction between the two, and this is exactly what I want to unpack today. I want to understand how on earth we got here and whether or not it's something we should fear or embrace. From the Diving Board is a show hosted by me, Charli Chats, dedicated to decoding digital culture by unpacking the hidden politics behind the screen. But before we dive in, I want to introduce myself in this episode because I really feel like I haven't, which is so random. But I'm Charli and I like to yap on the internet about political culture, pop culture, trends, and kind of figure out how they all blend together. Often I'll just yap into the abyss and sometimes I will end up posting it on YouTube or Spotify. But I will say, if you're new, this is actually a really good foundational video to understand what I stand for and my channel, because I feel like it does kind of paint the underlying picture here in terms of my idea of the connection between politics and pop culture. And it kind of unpacks as well why I even decided to make this channel in the first place. So if you're new, welcome. And also I'm new too. I'm actually new around here. Like I only started on YouTube 6 months ago and I also took like a 4-month break. So I've only really been doing this for like 2 and a bit months. We're both new here. But the reason I say this is because I am still learning the ropes. I'm still learning how to edit, script, come up with ideas. I'm currently in the process of trying to get better equipment, like a stand for my microphone, one of those pop filter thingies. I don't know if that's necessary. Let me know if you think the audio quality is terrible or if you think it's awesome and I don't need to change anything. As a new creator, I do often get questions about how to grow a small YouTube channel and where to even start with it all, and I totally feel you. I'm in this with you. We're all in this together. Something that has actually really helped me has been Skillshare, because I genuinely think that trying to get into the creative industry feels so exclusive. There are so many barriers to entry. It feels like there's so much equipment that you need when honestly sometimes you don't. It's more about your idea and how you're putting it together. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. Skillshare has been particularly helpful for me as a new creator, particularly as I've been learning the ropes of how to edit and make my content more personal and engaging. And all of these things I've never had like a traditional academic background in either, so that's been really awesome to be able to access that content. Recently, I've spoken about how I watched Jordan Teresa's class on video essay making, which I found really insightful for the early early stages of creating content and planning content, but I wanted to learn more about editing. So I've actually also been taking a class which is called YouTube Video Editing, Developing Your Signature Style. I'm a huge fan of making education more accessible, so if you are too, the first 500 people to use the link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so get started today. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Okay, let's get into it. Once upon a time, pre-social media, people read the newspaper. It's actually wild. Like, I could literally just mic drop, end the video there. And before you click off and ask, Charlie, what on earth does this have to do with the price of fish? Well, let me explain. We need to unpack the medium that we consume the media before we unpack how politics and pop culture have converged. Because I'm going to argue in this video that a lot of the reason that pop culture has become political and vice versa is because of the medium through which we consume it. So I promise we will get back to more culturally relevant things. It won't be long. I promise. Stay with me on this one, okay? Newspapers used to be the backbone of democratic society, but then something changed. Journalism stopped being about informing and started being about entertaining and engaging. So let's unpack what exactly happened here. Well, let's go back to the golden age of journalism. It was post-World War II. Women were in the kitchen where they should be, and children were silent until spoken to. Like, again, mic drop. Take me back. Take me back. After a period of global chaos and tragedy, and the very real notion that democracy could truly be swept out beneath us, people had a newfound interest in being informed about what was going on in politics. We wanted hard facts. We wanted information about what our politicians were doing every day. We wanted to know what went sour, what was going well. We wanted to understand it all. Slowly but surely, though, this type of journalism has quite literally died. Media became entertainment.
No matter what you're interested in, you're likely to find something about it in the newspaper.
And I feel like a big period where this shift was really quite dramatic was the 1980s. It was the period of infotainment, as they called it. Essentially, consider late night TV shows where they discuss the news, but also these late night talk shows tried to capture our attention so we stayed on that particular channel as opposed to the myriad of others that we could pick. And so they started using hooks to keep us there. They invited special guests, sometimes celebrities. They personalized the news more and they decontextualized the news as well. It was more an emotional experience rather than a factually enriching one. The start of every news episode was with some kind of catchy slogan or catchy music. It still is. In fact, Rupert Murdoch has literally said the news business is the entertainment business. But journalism has kind of always been business in a sense. I mean, if we look back to that golden era of journalism, that was also done in a way because they knew that it would sell. We wanted hard facts, and so we got hard facts. As technology improved, we wanted engaging news, and so we got engaging news. Both of those things were, in a sense, business strategies to make more money. The privatization of the news, though, is a good thing. We definitely don't want governments to be controlling the narrative because that would be a kind of Orwellian society, which George Orwell severely warned us against. In the late 1940s, George Orwell wrote a book, 1984, where he basically states that one of the biggest threats to democracy would be the censorship of information. We must fear basically any political policy which brings the censorship of information, the lack of freedom of movement, and the lack of individuality of thought. The bad guy here was the government. And in a context of the Cold War, where we were fearing socialism and communism, this had a pretty big chokehold on society. We absolutely did not want our government to be dictating what we could and couldn't read or watch or consume. In 1985, Neil Postman wrote a different kind of novel. It was called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And in his novel, he suggests that maybe it's not the government we need to fear, and maybe it's not the government that's the bad guy here when it comes to oppression, but what if it's ourselves? As we continue to consume entertainment media, we spend more and more hours watching and consuming this entertainment and engaging content, and technology and media becomes more and more sedative and provides us with more and more instant gratification. We ultimately willingly walk into our own oppression. And I can only imagine, I feel like Postman would be freaking out right now. He'd be like, guys, I literally told you this was going to happen. At the time, the concern was that darn TV. We favored speed, convenience, flashy images, and entertainment over reading boring, dense newspapers. And as Postman argues, when you read a sentence, it automatically demands you to question whether or not the proposal is true. So for example, when you read, "My name is Charlie," you have a moment to question whether it's subconsciously or consciously, whether or not you want to accept that that is true. Or it might bring up some questions like, yeah, but is that her real name? Is that a fake name for the internet? However, he says that when we see visual images, we don't really have that same response. We don't necessarily have the same visual literacy to see an image and then question whether or not we want to accept that. Now, I will say, and I will caveat here, that I do think in some contexts, particularly in the modern day, we do have some contexts where we will question whether or not the image is true. For example, if we see an influencer post a picture with a particularly skinty waist that day and a particularly glowy skin, we might start thinking that maybe they've face-tuned it, maybe they've edited it. I don't know. Or if we start seeing images of Kim Jong-un hugging Taylor Swift, we might also question that. I don't know, maybe I will. I'm not completely sold. I'm not completely sold on those ones. But that's because we do have literacy around face tuning and AI. That's because as people who consume visual media quite a lot, particularly Gen Z, given we've basically grown up with our phones, we kind of do know when an image looks a bit iffy. But consider the circumstance where a reputable source like a government or the royal family posts an image. We're a little bit less likely to question whether or not it's distorted because of the person posting the image. And I feel like a good example is Princess Catherine when she posted that photo on, or at least her team posted that photo on Instagram where it was obviously edited. That was weird, not only because it was like a major editing mistake, but also it was weird because I don't think many of us expected that the royal family would be editing their photos in the first place. We don't expect that kind of photo distortion or video distortion tactics from reputable sources. Sure, as we build up our literacy around what looks like AI, what looks like a deep fake, etc., we're going to kind of question these things more easily. But I still think the premise is true that when we read a sentence, we are way more likely to question its truth over when we see an image. The power of images quite literally killed print. News shows on TV became news websites to newsletters to apps like X, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. The transfer of information from the newsroom to citizens can be quite literally instantaneous. We get notifications when new news articles are being posted, and sometimes we can even see live videos of global events as they occur on the ground. To be seen in news or media right now, it doesn't really matter anymore what your credentials are. It doesn't matter whether you slaved away as an unpaid intern or whether you did the hard yards in university to get your journalism degree, or even if you're considered reputable within the industry itself. If you can capture attention online, you can report. The thing that's so crazy about this is the reputability of what you actually have to say is secondary to whether or not you can draw focus and pull attention. Because without pulling attention, there's no way of even expressing what you were going to say in the first place. When attention is the currency, it's not just brands and influencers who are trying to capitalize off of this, but it's literally everyone. It's politicians as well. And that's how we end up with elections that feel more like pop culture moments. In an essay by Chris Hayes, which was published in The Atlantic, he says, every single aspect of human life across the broadest categories of human organization is being reoriented around the pursuit of attention. Now, of course, grabbing attention isn't a new thing. It's exactly how commercials have been around for years. It's exactly how companies have been selling products. And to be fair, even in a political and political political election context, we've seen how the use of charisma by politicians like JFK, or even the fact that someone might have a Hollywood reputation like Ronald Reagan, can influence political outcomes. While attention grabbing might have always been around as a technique to get us involved in whatever you were trying to say, it's even more important now because the volume of content that exists in the world is so significant that if you can manage to draw focus from that onto yourself, you have won some kind of lottery. The impacts of gaining attention are dramatic. You can become a billionaire. You can become a politician. You can own a social media platform if you wanted to. You can also then dictate attention. And once you get our attention, it doesn't even really matter what you have to say anymore. If a politician can harness more support in a day and gain $81 million worth of funding from a simple endorsement from pop culture princess Charli XCX, then perhaps we can just kick the whole explaining your policies before you get elected thing by the wayside. That'll be cool. Totally kidding there.
365 my girl. I know the influence, I know the impact, and I know the vibes. And the girlies love the vibes, and that's just what it's about.
In an article for The Guardian, Jess Carter Morley argues that the rise of fake news has devalued facts. We simply can't accept everything we read or hear online anymore because we know that statements online are fallible, and particularly in relation to politics, where we've seen how fake news can quite literally dictate election results. Because of this, she says, voters are basing judgments of character off of vibe.
I have no more campaigns to run. My only agenda, I know because I won both of them.
But first, let's unpack what the hell a vibe even is. I don't even know if many of us would even be able to explain that off the dome, and I definitely couldn't. So I'm relying on Carter Morley's article, so thank you so much. Vibes definitely seem to be more conducive with a feeling rather than factual information.
What section of the Constitution has been breached?
Just the vibe.
Although they certainly did predate social media, at least the terminology did, social media has dramatically increased the way that we use the word vibes, the way that we refer to vibes, and what we really mean when we talk about vibes. Vibes can be good, bad. They can also be cottagecore or Y2K or Tumblr 2013. They can be so many different things. And so what fits in a vibe, what we're referring to within a vibe, can be this really randomly elusive definition. They don't just refer to a feeling though, they seem to refer to different fashion trends, can include different people. Author Robin James says the following in relation to what vibes mean in a digital context. A vibe is how we see ourselves the way AI and algorithms see us. What they do is look for patterns, clusters of data points that fit together. On social media, people collect different images and put them together in very much the same way that algorithms cluster data points. I kind of love that definition, and I also kind of hate it. So when summer of 2024 was coined undeniably brat, and Kamala was undeniably part of that definition of it being a brat summer, we kind of didn't bat an eyelid. We were all like, yeah, I guess she is brat. Like, we couldn't really explain to you why, but sure, pop her in the category, I guess. That makes sense. It's also why when Kamala called Trump weird, it was potentially the most damaging insult that she could throw at him. Because to be weird on the internet, and not weird on the internet in a cool way, weird on the internet in a weird way, is really not cool. Like, it's really not the vibe. He's a weird vibe. And that is not the kind of vibe you want to be. Vibes mattered perhaps more so than anything during that election. And obviously it didn't work out completely for Kamala, RIP, but it did play a significant role for a period of time there. I just feel the need to step in here and say that this video is using Kamala as an example a lot because it's obviously very culturally relevant. I obviously didn't vote in the US election because I am Australian. And I just wanted to say that I'm not condoning all of Kamala's policies either. Like, I'm obviously in this video showing a preference for Kamala over Trump, but I'm not trying to endorse everything that Kamala stands for. There's lots of issues with her campaign as well, and I'm using Kamala as an example because I think she is one of the most relevant examples within the pop culture space that I occupy. In the context of discussing politics, I think that vibes also bring a lighthearted vibe to the conversation. In a recent study that was done in a Canadian context by Rupert Murdoch and Paul Surratt, it was found that there is currently a tendency to avoid conversations about policy options, party platforms, ideological positions, and ethical debates, and instead to cover politics in conversation as entertainment, as you would maybe cover a reality TV show. And perhaps this is because politics feels so dark and out of our hands right now. Lots of political analysts and journalists have spoken about how Gen Z and millennials feel particularly helpless and overwhelmed by the political context in which we live. So it doesn't really strike me as that surprising that we're jumping on satirical forms of media to talk about politics, or we're talking about politics through the metaphors of pop culture and social media. And perhaps it feels like we gain a bit of power in doing this. We can laugh off the situation rather than sit in dismay and cry about it, because honestly, that's how I feel half the time. It's like, oh my god, scrolling through the news, I need to go on like an Iron Man run or something, or just like lie still for like 24 hours straight. You know what I mean? 365 girl. But here's the thing. Maybe this conflation between pop culture and politics isn't so bad. Maybe instead of gatekeeping politics to boring, dense information in political documents and newspapers, we're actually making it more accessible than ever. In a piece done by Politics and Rights Review, the author argues that the interplay between politics and pop culture creates a richer, more nuanced societal narrative, which ultimately humanizes politicians and makes them more relatable to the general public. They argue that because a politician can go viral, their brand, and hopefully their messaging as well alongside it, can become more accessible to different populations, and particularly populations who might have been disenfranchised by political discourse in the first place, or populations who aren't particularly engaged, like young people. Arguably, that golden age of political journalism was an entirely exclusive one. It was reserved for the elite who were able to understand political concepts, who were educated, and who had time to read through dense political excerpts in the newspaper. Education wasn't accessible to many people, particularly people from marginalized backgrounds and communities. So perhaps active engagement with political discourse wasn't as widespread as we might like to think it was. So when politicians sit down with pop culture personas and influencers like Kamala Harris going on Call Her Daddy or Donald Trump going on Joe Rogan, perhaps that actually means that politics is being understood and spoken about by a much more diverse group of people than maybe would ever have been possible. It also makes politics cool, depending on which bubble you exist in. Some of those people I just named are going to be a lot cooler than others, but there's a good argument there for a lot of people not engaging in politics because they just don't think it affects them, or they don't think it's something that they should care about, or they just have different interests. And I think when we do have these big personas talking about politics, it makes it more accessible, it makes it more engaging, and it does mean that people have the ability to take that to then further inform themselves about politics in the first place. Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance and all of the subtle hints, or maybe not so subtle hints, towards the political context in the United States arguably had a significant impact on his fans and how they think about politics. It may have simply reinforced a lot of people's views, but it also probably got a lot of people thinking about things in a way they maybe hadn't before. And that's an incredible power that pop culture can have on political values and political sentiments within society. And notably, we've got to think back on this golden era of news. We got to take off those rose-tinted glasses, because particularly in an Australian, British, and United States context, so many major players in this news space were dictated by one guy. Literally one guy, and he could then infuse his political beliefs into the news. In his time, the last 40 years, Murdoch faced numerous accusations of distorting the media to ensure his political allies won elections. Under this light, print media doesn't seem that great. And I'm going to counter-argue my counter-argument. I do think we lose a bit of nuance when we prioritize podcasts, for example, over different forms of political journalism. And this is because obviously podcasters at the forefront are trying to make it in the entertainment and media industry, and they don't have a guideline of ethical principles that they have to function against. If they want to bring on a particular politician who aligns with their own values, they can. If they want to edit it in a particular way that makes their content more radical, more soundbitey, grab more of our attention, they will. And still, according to technology and culture journalist Taylor Lorenz, she says that the internet news influencer space skews heavily male and conservative. Men are dominating the news space from a margin of 2-1. And not only is there a gender divide in this particular social media space, but the landscape itself is also heavily dominated by people who align with conservative and right-wing values over left-wing values, which typically has a lot more funding and money behind it. This means that right-wing creators can reach audiences much faster because they can funnel a lot more money into their own creation and into their own social media careers. So I guess when answering the question, is vibes-based politics a sign that we've all become really politically shallow, or whether it's actually a sign that politics is more accessible, it's one of those ones where we answer with like a bit of this and a bit of that, which is like such a dissatisfying answer to a lot of us, I think. Politics is pop culture because it doesn't matter who you are, you need to lean into this attention framework in order to get us listening to what you have to say. But the irony is, while information is so accessible, arguably more accessible than it ever has been before, our algorithms are driven by engagement and they're driven by attention grab style videos, which promotes controversy, chaos, outrageous statements. So the information we're actually seeing is often the least interesting or least informative part. It doesn't really feel like that in particular is good for democracy. But the truth is, vibes-based politics can be both a problem and an opportunity. It's an opportunity if you then lean into that, if you gain attention and you do something really valuable with it and you share interesting and informative information from it. It's a hindrance when you gain attention and just gain attention for the sake of it and do nothing with it other than become powerful, rich, famous, and rule an entire nation. But hey, if you found this video interesting, then perhaps you agree to an extent that there is some value in talking about politics from a vibes-based standpoint. Because to be honest, if I had just read you political documents, I can highly guarantee that you would not be still here. We would not be here. This channel wouldn't exist. It would not be the vibe. It would not be the vibe.
The girlies love the vibes, and that's just what it's about.
With all that being said and done, if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe to my channel. And if you're following on Spotify, rate my podcast 5 stars. And I've started posting fortnightly, so hopefully expect to see that kind of pattern start a little bit. And if you have any interesting comments in relation to today's topic, please leave them down below. I always love reading them. Follow me on Instagram if you want to see more, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!